Hey guys, it's Super Ducky Power, and today I am going to be teaching you how to make this Dalia Falmea plushie. She didn't turn out quite as I hoped, but I think that she still isn't terrible. If I could redo it, I would absolutely make her body and her head both whiter and give her more hair, but I mostly like how she turned out and some of the details on her dress. It was really hard to try and mimic the gradient effect that's on her dress in the game, but I tried my best with multiple shades of red. And just as a note, I would like to say that this is not suitable for use by children or pets. It has a lot of pieces that are not secure enough to be used by those groups. And please use caution when you handle scissors, hot glue, and for this project, we will be using felt, which you can get at just about any fabric or craft store. You're going to want at least 2 shades of red. I used 3. And then orange, yellow for her hair mostly, and some of the finer details on her outfit. Black for her pupils of her eyes. White for the actual whites of her eyes. And tan for her skin. And then for other supplies you're going to need, you will need a good pair of scissors. I used fabric scissors, which I got at a craft store. Sewing needle and thread. I use white sewing thread, but you can use just about any color you want. A wooden dowel for stuffing. I finally found mine. Hot glue gun and glue sticks to do some of the details, or it's just a little bit easier than sewing. And then, of course, stuffing to actually fill in the plushie. The first part you're going to want to work on is the body of Falmea. I wish that I had made it a little bit wider, but the general shape I think did turn out well. And so you're just going to cut this straight from your medium-ish red color, not the dark red, which I used for her lips later or for the gemstone on her necklace, but the more medium red, not quite the light red that goes for the bottom of her dress that gives us that little bit of a gradient. And you just cut this essentially to the shape of her body in-game as close as you can. I did not include hands or feet with the tan felt in this project. You can if you want. Also, I would give a little bit of the rounding to her shoulders, because in the game you can see that her dress actually has a little bit of shoulder padding. I don't remember what exactly those sleeves are called, but they're on a lot of ball gowns. I think Cinderella has them kind of, but it's like less pronounced on hers, but they are still definitely there. So you do want to get that little bit of detail in, though when you sew it might kind of disappear as far as the effect goes. And so you're going to need 2 of this dress. You want them to be about equal size. It's okay if they're not exact, as when you sew the pieces together, often the little bits of difference between them will kind of not be noticeable, but you want to get pretty close. And you can do that by lining them up and trimming them till they're about how you would like them to be. After you have cut the 2 main body shapes, you're going to want to work on the beginning of the gradient or the fire on her dress. To get that effect, I took the lighter red and I kind of gave it a little bit of a flame out on the bottom, although you don't have to do this because later I added orange at the bottom to where you can't really see this part. But you're going to add this lighter red color to make it have a little bit of that gradient from the darker red on the top of her dress down into the lighter red into the orange. To look more like fire, because in-game her dress actually genuinely looks like fire, but unfortunately, since we're using felt here, that's not really realistic. But you are also going to, at the very top of this lower skirt part, this lower lighter red part of the skirt of her dress, you're going to end up kind of cutting out kind of a little bit of waviness to kind of get that flame effect, to make it look like it's more gradual into the fire. And then this will be highlighted actually with yellow later, but for now you're just going to do that a little bit And it doesn't have to be the same on both pieces. You are going to need 2 of these as well. They should be about the same height and cover about the same area of the dress, but they don't have to be the same in the waviness cut out from the top at the belt line. Okay, and then once you have this lower skirt part done, I just glued it to the top layer, or the main body / dress. And you're going to do this with both pieces, but you want to make sure that you get your orientation right for both sides. So when you're doing the back side of the dress, you want to flip it over and flip the skirt and do it on the opposite end so you don't mess up your alignment of the dress later. So you want to be careful with your gluing here and make sure you pay attention to that. So then I just kind of flipped it over, flipped it back to make sure I was doing it right as I completed this part. And then you can do what I do also to help you with the hot gluing. My hot glue gun's kind of fickle, so I end up using scissors to hold down the parts I've already passed, or the parts that I need to go through. While I add the glue to the bottom and then hold it down to complete the gluing. But if your hot glue gun works, you hopefully don't have to do the same thing as I do. Alrighty, and here's where you get to start sewing. I sewed from the bottom left of the front of the dress, across, up, through the arm, and around, and you could leave the top open like we did with Mulinda and allow yourself to stuff through that point. But I actually just kept going, stuffed a little bit. Once I had about sewn 3/4 of the way through the entirety of the dress / body. But you can kind of choose where you'd like to stuff from. If you want to give her arms more volume than I did, make them a little bit fluffier than I did, then that's fine. It's up to you, it's your project, but I did not stuff the arms. I left them kind of flat, and then I added into more sleeve details later that make them have a little bit more puffiness, but other than that I mostly left them be. And so here you can see where I'm stuffing. I stuffed from the right hand side of the skirt of her dress, but you can stuff just about anywhere if you leave the room for it. And I did this just so then I could close it with one long line of thread, or I think I actually messed up and had to restart my line of thread. But in theory, I could have done one continuous line if I had successfully stuffed this fully with the line that I'd already started earlier. And you don't have to do one line of thread. I just think it's kind of nice sometimes to only have a couple to tie off, or a couple to later hide under details of her outfit later. But it's your plushie, and you can stuff and sew however you want it as long as you get her done. Alrighty, and then the next part I worked on was I made kind of the cuffs or sleeves, or added the gradient effect to her arms / sleeves. And to do this, I just cut a line that was pretty thick from the lighter red color of felt. I made the wavy kind of top for the flame effect, and then I just wrapped it around her arm, made sure that it was about the right width, length around, cut it to fit, and then glued it all together in place. And then I also glued it closed at the end by where her hands would be. You have a little bit of freedom with how you want to do the flames. You can make them sharper, you can make them more wavy and smooth, or you can not put them at all if you wanted. But I found that doing this to make the cuffs on sleeves works really well, and I usually hide the ends of that felt piece where they connect at the back of the plushie, because these plushies aren't really meant to be played with necessarily. They're mostly for decoration, so you can set them on a shelf, and as long as the front looks incredibly nice, you can kind of hide some of your messier parts at the back, or you can try to keep it as clean as possible so that then it looks good from any side. I really don't think that even with the end showing on the back that it looks bad, but it does look better to have it look clean on the front, in my opinion. Alrighty, you can now put the body to the side / the dress, and we're going to start her head and hair. I was limited by the fact that I made her body really skinny. If I had made it wider, I could have had a wider face, which would have made the details on her face later a lot easier, so I'd suggest making your plushie wider than I did. But you're just going to cut a kind of typical face shape that you would see on a simple drawing, with the flat top and then flat top of the head, and then a rounded ovular shape on the bottom, like kind of a half oval for her head shape. And then you're going to cut the hair, and for the hair, she's kind of got hair going up and holding in place. You would need a lot of hairspray for that in real life. It almost looks like a fire. And so you just want to cut this to be around the same width or wider than the head shape that you've already cut, and then kind of add those little flame pointy parts at the very top. And you're going to need to cut 2 of the tan face pieces and 2 of the orange hair pieces. And this is just so that then when you sew it together, you're able to fit stuffing between all these layers, and so then it looks complete on both sides of Falmea. And we're also going to add a little bit more detail to the flame with yellow, because if you look at Falmea in pictures or in the game, you'll see that her hair does have a little bit of gradient as well into yellow from the orange color. Her hair is largely orangish red, like fire, but it does go into that yellow. So I only put 1 piece of yellow, which I attached to the front orange hair piece, which I would advise you to do the same. I think it worked pretty well, and it made it so you didn't have as many layers to sew together later. And then I just glued the hair pieces together. So I glued the orange hair onto the front of the face, and then the yellow onto the back of the front face piece, and then the orange onto the back of the back head piece, back face piece, whichever you'd like to say. And I thought that looked pretty good. I also glued in some little ears, which I cut from the tan felt. And I just glued these between the yellow and the orange layer, which you'll see me do in this video. I think when I start adding face details in a moment, perhaps. Or, there we go. Okay, there's the ears. And so for the ears, you don't have to add ears. I did because I think it makes her head look a little bit more dynamic and a little more complete. And I just glued that to the face under the orange piece, and then glued down the orange hair over the ears to make it look like it had some depth to it and was more like a real person in that regard. And I think it worked out decently well. So I would suggest doing something similar to that. Because I made her face so small on this plushie, I was severely limited in what I could do for her face pieces, but I used the darker red color. I was going to use it for her eyes as well, but I ended up only using it for her lips and her necklace later. And for her lips, I would just cut essentially an oval and then cut a little triangle out of the top to make it sort of have a heart shape that you see on a lot of lips on characters in the game. And then for the nose, I just cut sort of a triangular shape, but I made it, I didn't give it a third end on the top. I cut that part off. So it's a triangle with the top cut off and made to be flat. And then for the eyes, you're just going to cut kind of, I'm not sure how to describe it, kind of like cat eyes. You know, you're going to cut an oval, but then you're going to make them a little bit sharper on the ends. And then I was going to try to add red irises for her eyes, but they were going to be too big and I wasn't going to be able to add her pupils in, and I thought that just red eyes would look really weird. So I went with pupils only, but if you make her face bigger than I did, her head bigger, then you might be able to fit more detail onto her face. If I was redoing this project, I would make her head a lot wider, a lot bigger, so then I had more room to work with her face, because I don't love how her face turned out. I think it's okay, but if I could do it all over again without it taking a while, I would. So then the last face piece I made were actually her eyebrows, and I considered making these red, but I ultimately made them orange, and this was just very small, straight pieces of the orange felt that I just glued above the eye pieces under the hair, or well, on top of the hair, but underneath the hairline. And I think that overall her face turned out decently, especially with how little area I had to work with. And you can also make any changes you'd like to the colors of her face. If you'd like a different colored lip, if you'd like a lighter lip, a darker lip, add eye color, whatever. Once you've glued all the face pieces on, you can start sewing. The sewing is not too hard. I did add another sewing type. I don't know what it's called, but essentially instead of doing the pull through and let it wrap around, I just went up and through, up and through, up and through, up and through, which you see on a lot of clothing, I think, mostly. And it's a little bit tricky around the ears. The ears you want to be careful with when you sew, but you gotta sew through them to make sure that you close up her head. I didn't realize that I'd gone a little bit off screen there, but you want to also make sure that you have time or room to get that stuffing in there. Either while you're sewing, you just pause sewing, stuff it, continue sewing from there, or stop your line of sewing thread and start a new one after you finished filling. And then after I completed sewing her head, I realized that it was going to be a little bit difficult to attach, so I actually, if you look in game, she has kind of a long neck, honestly. And so I mimicked that with just a few pieces of felt. I took the tan felt, just a line of it, rolled it, glued it together, took a piece of the medium-ish red felt, wrapped it around that tan piece, and then glued it together, and then glued it to the body and glued the head to it to make it all. Once you have attached the neck to the body, you're going to actually take a piece of longer yellow felt and you're going to secure it to the back of her neck, and this is going to be how you're going to make the pendant slash necklace for her that you see in game. And I just used a very thin chain for this to make this sort of chain of the necklace, or a thin piece of felt to make the chain of the necklace. And you're just gonna first glue the back, then bring the pieces to the front, have them meet sort of in the middle, making sort of a V or triangular shape. And then for the pendant itself, it is a pentagon shape for the gold fastening that the gem goes into. And so you're going to make that pentagon shape, except the sides are flatter. They're not at an angle like most pentagons are that you would see in like a math class. And then the actual gem itself is just a circle. I use the darker red felt, which I would suggest. I think it looks nice. It really stands out that way from the red dress. And then after this, if you play the game, you might notice that beneath her shoulders, she actually has a little bit of like a yellow cuff around her shoulders, or her upper arm or biceps. So I included that with just a plain, long, thin piece of yellow felt, which I wrapped around and glued to the arms right here. And then I also decided to go back and add a little bit more detail to the gradient or the flames of her dress. To do this, I took the yellow felt and I cut it a little bit wavy for the arm pieces, wrapped it around, glued it together like a belt, which I used for the other plushies. And I did this to both arms. You can choose to do this, choose not to do this. You can do it more pronounced fire shapes. You can do just straight lines, whatever you'd like. And then around her waist, I did a similar thing, except for instead of making it wavy, I made it a long, thin, straight piece of felt, which I then fit to the pattern which I'd already completed on her waist earlier, and I just used glue to do this. Secured it around, trimmed it to fit, and I thought it looked really nice in the end, and I thought it worked pretty well. Alrighty, and then the last thing you're going to do to finish off Professor Dalia Falmea is make the bottom of her skirt billow out like actual fire, like the dress in the game looks more like this. And so I made this I took a thicker piece of orange felt, a long strip of it. I cut it to be more pronounced fire than I had for the other parts of the dress, glued it around, trimmed it to fit, made sure that I glued the bottom closed, and I thought it looked really nice in the end. It might be my favorite detail on this dress, on this plushie in general. I really liked how it turned out and how it looks more like fire than the rest of her outfit does, besides her hair. And at this point, you should have completed your Dalia Falmea plushie. I would advise maybe making her a little bit larger than I did to give yourself more room to work and make her face a little bit easier to get those details on. Or you can make it exactly as I did, up to you. But you do have a little bit of creative flexibility with the designs on the dress and with the size of your plushie, which I think is kind of fun and different from the other plushies I've made so far. If you've been keeping up with this series of Wizard101 plushies, you know that this is the 4th one in the series, out of the 8 that I currently have planned. And the first was Headmaster Merle Ambrose, which I made one of and then went back and made a second one of to record the tutorial for. The second was Professor Halston Maelstrom, the Storm Professor, who I love. He's my favorite. And then Professor Melinda Wu, the Life Professor. And finally, Dalia Falmea, the Fire Professor, who I think actually turned out well. I like how they all look together. I think they're all very fun. I love Halston's hat so much still. And I do have 4 more planned currently, which will wrap up the main professors in my head and Headmaster Merle Ambrose. So it'll be in 2 weeks I will be releasing the Dworgyn tutorial, and then Cyrus, Lydia, and All Has Read finishing up the series on August 6th. If you like making these plushies and you complete these, if you wouldn't mind posting them on social media, I'd love to see them. I'd be really excited to see how your guys' turn out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and the other ones and those to come. Keep an eye out for those. Yeah, have a great morning, afternoon, or night wherever you are. If you enjoy my videos, please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, talking to me. I love interacting with you guys. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.